All right, so this one's looking at the history of China specifically. All right, so a couple things. First off, this is the one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. The Chinese civilization's been around for at least 4,000 years, if not more, with a very similar culture. Of course, they're geographically isolated, and usually when civilizations are isolated, they progress slower. So you could look at Native Americans. Over here in North America, and then, of course, the Aborigines in Australia. But instead, China advanced quite quickly and had a very advanced civilization, discovered things a lot of times a lot earlier than Europeans, even though they're isolated. So they were set up as a dynasty, so they had a series of rulers from the same family. And so these dynasties were like the Qin, Han, and Qing dynasties, some of the really big ones. But there was tons of them, and this worked all the way up until 5,000 years ago, all the way up until about 1910 AD, and so this went on for thousands of years of this kind of cycle of choosing leaders and stuff like that. Their only major connection to the West was the Silk Road. Silk Road is the main trading route. It really developed during the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire traded a few $1 billion worth equivalent today worth of silk, buying from the Chinese because they didn't know how to produce silk, and the rich Romans wanted access to that. And so that's what kind of spurred these Silk Roads, which brought money in for China. But the Chinese really weren't buying much from the Romans, as there was nothing much that they offered. And also, too, the Chinese are very protective of their culture, so they don't want a lot of foreign influence coming in to change their culture. And even buying products and stuff like that from Rome would have adjusted that as well, would have had an impact on their culture and how it developed. So we fast forward to the 19th and 20th century. And let me go ahead and just pull all these up. All right, so during this time, Europe, they had already colonized Africa and South Asia and stuff like that. And so East Asia was really the last area, but they never were able to fully colonize China. Instead, they got what's called a sphere of influence. So spheres of influence, instead of one country like Britain controlling all of China, you had several European countries like Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and even Japan having the sphere of influence, a little area in China where basically they economically controlled that area. So they controlled the business and trade there. They kept the Chinese from having higher end jobs and stuff like that. So they were kept down. Well, this created a lot of animosity from the Chinese towards the foreigners there. And they already really didn't like foreigners. And then also created this animosity towards their own government because their own government was so weak that they weren't able to keep these foreigners out. And so China responded with the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. The United States intervened to stop the Boxer Rebellion, and we intervened because we wanted to be able to trade with China. So if China had, gone to becoming a colony of like Britain, for example, we wouldn't be able to trade with China because it would be a British colony. And of course, if they kicked all the foreigners out, we wouldn't be able to trade with China either. So we stopped the Boxer Rebellion, and then we encouraged China to open their doors, and we got them to sign what was called the Open Door Policy, where they opened up and started trading with pretty much everybody, which of course angered a lot of Chinese people as they didn't want, again, more foreign influence coming in. So you got two groups that really became popular. You have the Nationalist Party, which is led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the Nationalist Party is going to be pro-democracy. And then you have the Communist Party, which is going to gain a lot of popularity during this time, and this is led by Mao Zedong. And so eventually, the communists are going to win out in a civil war in China, so the communists win and take over, and the nationalists, they fled to Taiwan. And Taiwan's an island off the southeast coast of China. Today, Taiwan claims to be independent, but China claims to have control of Taiwan. We defend Taiwan, and we recognize them as an independent state. And we also have our Navy there in the South China Sea defending Taiwan. So we tell China, like, if you mess with Taiwan, you're messing with the United States, and we will attack. So that is an area, it's a hotbed of contention today. In that area. So Taiwan is a democracy today. All right, that's that last point, just explaining what I was just talking about. All right, so during World War II, Japan invaded China and took over and treated them horribly. So if you think about the way the Nazis treated the Jews during the Holocaust during World War II, it's pretty much the way the Chinese are treated by the Japanese, including human experimentation, like what we saw happen to the Jews in the Holocaust. And they killed men, women, and children. They would even take, this is a photo of real babies that were impaled by bayonets. So they would kill babies with the tip of a bayonet and then throw the bodies of the infants into the streets as a warning, basically. I mean, it was absolutely brutal. Then here they're doing bayonet practice on live people. So they would tie people up and then just stab them over and over with a bayonet as practice, and of course a form of torture. And if there's any kind of rebellion against the Japanese whatsoever, I say rebellion, even just the slightest remark or something like that against the Japanese, they would cut your head off with the katana sword in front of everyone, and then they would place your head around the city to encourage people not to rebel in any way, shape, or form. So I mean, just like I can't express how brutal this was. Obviously, there's going to be some animosity today between the Japanese and Chinese as well, as this wasn't really that long ago. All right. And then, of course, they always use biochemical warfare in World War II as well. I talked about live human dissection with no painkiller or anything like that. All right, so after World War II, you get the Communist Revolution in 1949. The commies take over at this point, and then the nationalists flee to Taiwan. And that's just showing kind of the progress of that. So today, Taiwan, like I said, is a republic, and China is, and that's Chiang Kai-shek there. And China is technically called the People's Republic of China, or the PRC for short, and is still communist today, but has elements of capitalism in it. All right, the reasons why the communists were successful, mainly because Mao, he got support of the peasants, because he promised them land and things like that. He also got support of the women. He really encourage women to work, and not just work, but like pursue higher education, become like scientists and doctors and things like that. So when here in the U.S. we were having ads that were geared towards women about how you can clean better and make a really good dinner for your husband. In China, they're like, no, like go to school, become a doctor, become a scientist. So really pushing the rights of women and pushing them to excel. And then Mao also used guerrilla war tactics against the nationalists, which worked. And the nationalist government was corrupt. There was some people in there that were corrupt and really just ruined the name of their party as well. And then also they didn't like the fact that nationalists allowed foreigners in to dominate China. That's how they saw it, because they were allowing foreigners to invest and trade in China because that's how capitalism works. All right, so then Mao does something called the Great Leap Forward, which actually ends up killing several million people between 1958 and 61, where he really tried to change the culture of China around as well. So he made the farmer the hero of China because they got a lot of people and they need to feed them. And now the enemy of the state are people like teachers and lawyers and doctors and other educated people. So the people that were the enemies, the educated people, were sent out to work on these farms and stuff like that. And of course, there weren't really enough healthcare and stuff like that for the people, and these people weren't good at farming, and then ended up in the deaths of millions of people. So, yeah, it didn't really work out that well. All right, so during this Great Leap Forward, they did 5-year plans. So the idea is that the economy is planned out for a 5-year period. So that means, you hit your quota during that time, and you don't do anything else. And so the problem is, if something happens during this 5 years, and something needs to be produced, it's not going to happen because you have to wait for the next 5-year plan to plan it out. So they worked in communes, so that's where you got thousands of people working on a farm together. The property is held in common, so it's not private. There's production quotas, which are going to be high to push them to work hard, because remember, you can't get fired in communism. But the products really sucked, especially when you look at their products they made, like their industrial products, because China, unlike Russia, China was not full of factories, had not really urbanized yet. So you're taking mainly an agrarian society and trying to get them to produce things in factories, quote unquote. So this started out in cottage industries, meaning like mainly in homes and stuff. And they used really cheap products like pig iron, and the quality sucked, and people weren't bringing in any money. So he tried to industrialize China, increase the literacy rates, class privilege ended. People in rural China received free health care. You had one-party dictatorship and denied basic rights and stuff like that. And this is where he took over like parts of Mongolia and Tibet. All right. So the things that they were going against, so they're trying to change, old thoughts, old culture, old customs, old habits. So he's trying to completely change just China in and of itself, its culture of 1,000 years, completely shift it in a new direction. So this is where you have to really create a personality cult, kind of like in North Korea, or cult of personality. So with Mao Zedong, there's tons of propaganda. You got to get all of people in China united into one mission, if you will. So members in communist countries, it's not about the individual, it's about the state. How can you serve the state? How can you be an important player in the development of the state? So you sacrifice all things for the state, including your family, for this. And so one of the things to get people all in the same book is to have all the same book. So you got Mao's little red book. They all read the same book. Think of it as like the Communist Bible as well. This also means you're going to get rid of all religion. So atheism, you're going to encourage atheism so that you worship and follow the leader, Mao Zedong, above all else. Whereas in Christianity, your allegiance is to God above the government. And that's not going to work in a communist country where you want ultimate control over the people. All right, so propaganda posters like this in a factory, people look happy, all reading the red book. The factory looks clean, stuff like that. Here you got a woman scientist, like I was just talking about. Women being able to excel and do things. And then here you got, again, notice it's a group of people, like I was saying, it's not about the individual. So individually, these people represent different parts of Chinese society and sectors of the economy. But you notice they're all together. They all have or most of them have the red book. They're all moving together in the same direction. Represents progress. Really, this is similar to probably that painting you've seen showing westward expansion with the angel floating over the people as they're moving west across the frontier. So it's the same kind of idea in this picture here. All right, went until 1972, the first U.S. president met with Mao Zedong. That was President Nixon. And then we started working with him a little bit. And then this is where, after Mao Zedong, you start getting communism mixed with some capitalism. And this is under Deng Xiaoping. He was born in 1905, died in 1997. But he took over after Mao Zedong. And he wanted to de-Maoize China. It's called Demobilization. And so basically this is trying to change everything Mao did and stuff like that. So change things in agriculture, industry, science, and defense. All right. I'll go on here. So here in 1989, you get Tiananmen Square. So 89 was a big year worldwide. You had the fall of Berlin Wall in November of 1989 there in East Berlin. And then you have Tiananmen Square in China. This is a pro-democracy rally led by college students in China, in Beijing, wanting more freedom and more democracy. And this was a peaceful protest. They're not going around blowing up things or anything like that. It was led by this guy there, Wang Dan, from Beijing University. And like this one says, democracy, our common ideal. They got paper mache, what looks kind of like the Statue of Liberty. They call it the goddess of democracy. And then the government moves in. So they move in with tanks and all kinds of stuff to stop this. This is a really famous picture from Tiananmen Square, the lone man standing in front of the tanks stopping them as well. But then the tanks move in, start shooting at the people and rolling them over. And when I say rolling them over, I literally mean rolling them over. That was a person that was squashed by a tank. And so this was done all over the square there in Beijing. Keep in mind, this is 89. This is on television. This is, that day on TV around the world, seeing how China is treating their people and limiting their ability to speak. And so this is going to have a huge impact on China and their relation with the rest of the world, especially the West. So Wang Dan was arrested, along with other student leaders, and they have a memorial for the students that were killed. And the Chinese military stayed in there holding down the square for a while to reestablish order. But that's going to cause the West to put a lot of pressure on China to allow their people more freedom. Otherwise, we're not going to trade with them. And China needs that. They need trade with us and the rest of the West. And so that forces them to have to adjust some. All right, Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British colony. It's an area where they had a sphere of influence. From 1837 to 1997, when it was transferred back to China. It's the 10th largest economy in the world. Hong Kong acts as its own country, as a city-state. So if you ever watch the Olympics, for example, Hong Kong will have its own team, separate from China. So China tries to claim to have Hong Kong. Hong Kong's like, nah. So they're mainly manufacturing, also service industry. And this is where East meets West. So if you want to ever visit China, Hong Kong is a good place to start because a lot of people speak English. You're going to see a lot of things that look very familiar, and then at the same time you'll see things that are definitely very Chinese. And so it's a good place to start. First time to going to Asia. But this area has more millionaires per capita on the population than any other place in the world. It's a very, very rich city. All right, and then of course here's this political cartoon looking at China wanting to control Tibet, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And they get to the 80s and 90s, you see economic reforms. You start seeing privatization, meaning they're taking things from being government controlled to privately controlled. So think of like public schools and private schools. So they're taking things that were once controlled by the government, now giving them over to private individuals to work for profit. But politically, they're communists. So you think economically, they're starting to lean a little bit more capitalist, but politically communist. So that means they still squash freedom of speech. They still don't like religion. They just blew up 3 churches like 3 months ago. Churches that have 20, 30,000 people that attend them, and of course they blew them up, not when the people were in there, but still, just there's this war against religion. In general within China, which is interesting because specifically Christianity is taking off in China. People are converting by the thousands currently. All right, and that's it on that one.